I've spent almost 10 years on a documentary all about the forever chemical problem, interviewing so many different incredible and brilliant people. I decided to make this series to include highlights from each of those interviews, giving their stories more life than just a few moments in a film.
Lawrence Cahoon. I'm a professor of biology and marine biology here at UNC Wilmington. So this is a model of a water molecule. The little blue balls are hydrogens, that's the H2 part, and the little green ball in the middle is the oxygen, or the O part. The other little sticks with nothing on them are unbonded pairs of electrons. So it's a very small molecule. When we talk about reverse osmosis and things like that, that becomes relevant. And that is in comparison to GENX, and this is an approximation of what that looks like. So it's a much bigger molecule, but the interesting thing is it's got fluorine atoms stuck all through it. The chemistry to make this is fairly brutal, by the way. It's not only an unnatural molecule, it's a very difficult molecule to build. So that's what that factory does upstream. And they generate lots of other things that look kind of like this, but differ in one way or another. Those are often referred to as byproducts. Well, there's a lot of those coming out of that effluent, not just this stuff. We know right now that it does cause certain tumors, swelling livers, things like that. There were some number of measures of toxicity that they used in the long-term rat study. I believe there's only been one. I've seen that publication. It was done by DuPont chemists and published in the open literature. I understand that that study was then the basis for the European health assessment process, and that our folks here in the United States and North Carolina have then used the European assessment to base their assessments of risk. GENX requires that not only the workers in the factory where it's made take those precautions, but all the customers who receive the stuff and work with it are required to follow the same safety procedures. So these are not inherently safe compounds. Aside from being very unnatural, the nature of fluorine chemistry is that they're going to be risky for us. I learned in organic chemistry many years ago that you put those kinds of atoms together and you've got problems with toxicity, carcinogenicity, and so forth. It's just a question of how much. To say, oh, we had a consent that allowed us to produce the stuff with these following safety provisions, in terms of the workers at the plant, the customers, and so forth. And I think what they're trying to do is hide behind that permission to produce as an excuse for what they discharge. Now, the operative laws governing discharges are different. The Safe Drinking Water Act and so forth are relevant. The big one here, the one with which I'm most familiar, is the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is fairly specific. If you propose to discharge anything into the waters of the United States, that is navigable waters, the Cape Fear River is one of those, you must disclose the identities of those compounds and the expected concentrations of them. And that applies for chemicals that will be discharged above a certain very low threshold. You are supposed to know what you're putting out, and you are supposed to tell the regulatory agencies what those things are. And they will then take that information, supposedly, and permit certain discharges, tell you you have to keep the levels below certain levels, and you must monitor and report what your discharges are. When I look at the documents, I don't see that level of detail in the permits that govern this discharge. And my understanding from speaking with others who are knowledgeable in the field is that they did not disclose what they were supposed to disclose. And that may lead to legal action of various kinds. So I think what we have here is in a sense, certainly a failure on the part of the company to do everything they were required to do under the law, from my understanding of it, and frankly, a failure by the permitting authorities to dig deeper and ask all of the detailed questions that should have been asked. The Environmental Protection Agency, a federal agency, has the ultimate authority to issue these permits. These are federal permits. In the case of North Carolina, the authority to issue those permits and monitor compliance with them is delegated by EPA to the state, in this case the Department of Environmental Quality. That delegation of authority is broadly contingent on the ability of the state to do its legal job under federal law. There have been a few instances in other states where the EPA revoked that delegation of authority because the state wasn't doing its job properly. I don't know that that's the case here with GENX, but that will be investigated as part of the overall investigation. The question would be, did the state agency do its job? The guideline that they issued several weeks ago about how much GENX would be safe strikes me as bogus. They came up with a number with 5 significant digits, and we all look at each other in the science world and say there's no way you can be that precise. The guidance that they came up with was that 1,000 times more GENX was okay to have in your drinking water than the previous compound C8. Water molecule, GENX molecule. Reverse osmosis is basically a very, very fine-scale filtration system, and it basically uses pressure to force water molecules through a membrane. And the idea is that the pores in the membrane are small enough that molecules like this can't get through. Now, you are using pressure, and so it's possible, depending on the actual nature of the membrane, and there are different membranes, that you could squeeze a few of these through. It's very unlikely. The other systems that we have for dealing with contaminants like this one largely are chemical methods. It's not so much filtration as chemical methods. Chlorine, for example, oxidizes a lot of organic compounds. This molecule is extremely unreactive. That's why they make it Teflon, right? Teflon doesn't react with anything. So you can't destroy this chemically. You can't oxidize it with chlorine. You can't oxidize it with ozone. We use both in our treatment system. Activated charcoal, which has been proposed as a way to get this stuff out, seems to do a better job of binding the larger molecules, bigger than this. It does a better job with C8 than it does with GENX. It will bind some GENX. The problem is that activated charcoal is working at a molecular scale. When those binding sites are saturated, the activated charcoal will fail. It's like the filter has become clogged at a molecular scale. And so ultimately the problem is, if you were to install an activated charcoal system, say for your house, how would you know when it's not working? You wouldn't, right? No way to know. You can't detect this stuff at home. Reverse osmosis is based on physical principles that should operate all the time. So we're pretty confident that reverse osmosis will get this stuff out and let this through. The ultimate answer is to keep this out of the drinking water supply. It shouldn't be there at all. Stop putting it in the water, and then we won't have to have this discussion. We have what's called the public trust doctrine, and that's with capital letters. And the public trust doctrine holds that the waters and the air belong to the people. We are the owners. We own the Cape Fear River. The government, local, state, federal, are all acting as stewards of that trust. They don't own that water, we do. They manage it for our benefit. And that doctrine goes all the way back to Roman times. This is not something we cobbled together 40 years ago as part of the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act simply codifies some aspects of the public trust doctrine. And what has become apparent to me is that that public trust has been violated. We own that water. Nobody has a right to dump contaminants and toxicants in there without our knowing consent. And we didn't give knowing consent for this. It's got to stop, and it's got to never happen again.